Most people have heard the word ego used in conversation, often with a negative implication. When someone is said to have a big ego, it typically suggests arrogance or an inflated sense of self. But in the realm of psychology, particularly when we refer to the ego in the context of personality development, it carries a more nuanced and foundational meaning. Understanding the role of ego in personality development requires moving past the surface-level interpretations and into a more structured psychological framework. The ego is not simply a negative trait or a synonym for pride. It is one of the key components of how the human mind organizes thoughts, makes decisions, and relates to both the self and others. The ego, in classical Freudian terms, is one of three elements of the psyche: the id, the ego, and the superego. The id represents primal urges, desires, and instincts. It operates on the pleasure principle, seeking immediate gratification. The superego, on the other hand, is the internalized societal norms, moral standards, and ideals we develop as we grow. In between these two lies the ego, which is responsible for mediating the demands of the id and the restrictions of the superego. It operates on the reality principle, helping us navigate the world in a socially acceptable and realistic way. This balancing act is not just a mechanical function. It forms the core of how our personality takes shape. As a child grows, the ego starts to develop as the child learns to distinguish between self and environment. Early experiences of frustration, such as not getting a toy or being told no, challenge the child's instinctive desires. These moments require adjustment. Over time, the child learns that not all desires can be met immediately. This is one of the earliest tasks of the ego, learning to delay gratification and to find acceptable ways of achieving goals. The ego helps form boundaries between wishful thinking and actual possibility. Without this function, people would struggle to function in a cooperative society. The development of ego is not only about self-control, it is also about identity formation. As individuals move through different stages of life, the ego is central in constructing a coherent sense of who they are. For example, when a teenager begins to ask questions such as, "Who am I?" or "What do I believe?" this process is being guided by the ego. The ego integrates past experiences, values, emotions, and external feedback to form a stable self-image. This self-image, however, is never fixed. It evolves as new experiences, relationships, and environments challenge or reinforce certain aspects of identity. One of the critical functions of a healthy ego is adaptability. A person with a well-developed ego can evaluate situations objectively and adjust their responses appropriately. For instance, if someone loses a job, their initial instinct, linked to the ID, might be panic or rage. The superego might react with guilt or self-blame, but the ego steps in to assess the situation rationally, recognizing the emotions while also planning next steps. It balances internal emotional reactions with external demands. This capacity for flexible thinking is essential for long-term psychological health. However, ego can become rigid or defensive when threatened. Defense mechanisms like denial, projection, or rationalization are ways the ego tries to protect the individual from psychological pain. For example, if a person fails at a task, instead of accepting the failure and learning from it, they might blame others or make excuses. This is not necessarily a conscious choice, but an automatic function of the ego trying to preserve a stable self-image. Overuse of such defenses can become problematic, leading to distorted views of reality and limited personal growth. Another aspect worth exploring is the difference between a strong ego and a big ego. A strong ego does not mean someone is full of themselves. In psychological terms, a strong ego indicates emotional resilience, the ability to handle stress, and the capacity to function effectively in varied situations. It means having a stable sense of identity and the ability to reflect on one's own thoughts and behaviors. In contrast, what people usually refer to as a big ego often reflects insecurity, masked as overconfidence. It is when the ego becomes inflated, prioritizing self-importance over self-awareness and seeking validation rather than growth. Many interpersonal problems can be traced back to ego-related issues. For example, in relationships, a fragile or defensive ego can lead to miscommunication, power struggles, and lack of empathy. If someone cannot accept criticism, admit mistakes, or consider other perspectives, it often points to an ego that is underdeveloped or overly protective. On the other hand, someone with a healthy ego can navigate conflict with maturity, acknowledge personal faults, and work toward resolution without feeling diminished. Cultural and social factors also play a role in shaping the ego. In some societies, emphasis is placed on individual achievement and self-expression, which can lead to more pronounced individualistic egos. In other cultures where community and collective identity are prioritized, the ego may be more intertwined with group dynamics and expectations. Neither approach is inherently better or worse, but understanding these influences is important when examining how personality develops across different contexts. Education, parenting, and early life experiences have significant impacts on ego development. Children who are encouraged to explore, make choices, and reflect on their behavior tend to develop stronger egos. They learn how to handle setbacks, express themselves appropriately, and relate to others effectively. In contrast, overly controlling or neglectful environments can stunt ego development, leading to dependency, anxiety, or rigidity in adulthood. Therapeutic practices often aim to strengthen the ego rather than eliminate it. Contrary to popular misunderstandings, ego is not something to be killed or suppressed. In psychotherapy, the goal is to enhance ego functions such as insight, emotional regulation, and decision-making. Techniques like cognitive behavioral therapy, for example, help individuals become aware of irrational thoughts and replace them with more balanced thinking. This process is deeply connected to ego work, helping the person align their inner world with external reality. Mindfulness practices, while often associated with ego dissolution, actually assist in ego strengthening by increasing self-awareness. When people observe their thoughts without judgment, they are better able to differentiate between impulse, emotion, and reason. This reinforces the ego's role as mediator and decision-maker. Rather than being ruled by automatic reactions, a mindful individual uses ego functions to respond with intentionality. In adult life, the ego continues to evolve through challenges, transitions, and learning. Career changes, personal losses, new relationships, or parenthood all offer opportunities for the ego to adapt and grow. Every life stage presents new roles and expectations, and the ego must reorganize itself accordingly. An individual who reflects on their experiences, adapts to new realities, and maintains a sense of continuity amidst change demonstrates a mature personality, a direct outcome of healthy ego development. Self-reflection is one of the most powerful tools for ego development. When individuals take time to understand their motivations, reactions, and beliefs, they are actively engaging the ego in its most constructive role. This doesn't require dramatic revelations. Simple questions like, why did I react that way? What does this say about me? Or, what can I learn from this? Engage the ego in meaningful work. Over time, such reflection builds a deeper, more stable personality. In conclusion, the ego is not a problem to be fixed, but a function to be understood. It plays a central role in personality development by mediating between desire and morality, helping form identity, enabling adaptation, and maintaining psychological balance. When the ego is healthy, individuals are better equipped to face challenges, connect with others, and grow throughout life. When it is rigid, inflated, or weak, problems in behavior and relationships often arise. By understanding how ego works and how it shapes personality, we can become more intentional in how we develop ourselves and interact with the world. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more content on human psychology, self-awareness, and mental growth.